If you subscribe to Poultry News or Poultry Times, trusted since 1954, you may have heard there's a new breed that made its appearance on July 22nd. It's the Wyoming Rooster. It shares similarities to other breeds, but its call is unique. Without prompting, this new species is prone to say, "I told you so," and "I always knew I was right." Wednesday, July 22nd was a big day. After all this time, searchers got a state. Think about it. If you had been a searcher 5 years ago and you could have gotten a state, what would you have paid for that information? Hindsight is 20/20, but indulge me for just a moment. People said the chase began as a local treasure hunt, that it was really for Forrest's close circle of friends. I never thought these were strong arguments. Forrest included his contact information in the memoir. His friends already knew how to reach him. And he gave interviews to national publications just weeks after the launch. And very soon after the publication of the book, Forrest dissuaded people of this idea. Some propose New Mexico because it's been good to Forrest. It's where he found success, made lifelong friends, and indulged his passion as a collector and archaeologist. He raised his family there, retired there. On and on the arguments went. But now we know that these things, while true, were not behind his choice of a hiding spot. Now we know for certain. Forrest said it's in the mountains somewhere north of Santa Fe, with a wink. Forrest often described hiding the chest, and I think he loved it when searchers underestimated him. How could an 80-year-old man hide a 42-pound chest and no one knew about it, even his family? Obviously close to home, right? Well, no. And bravo, Forrest. I hope when I'm 80, I can do something half as audacious. Let's look at the announcement itself. Notice the first-person pronouns. This is interesting. Forrest could have used the definite article, and the meaning of the sentence would have been clear. In fact, he does that in the second sentence. But instead he claims ownership, twice in the first sentence. What does it mean? Is it subconscious, at a time when Forrest feels like he's lost ownership of the chase? Or is it deliberate, a subtle reminder to the finder? Personally, I love these pronouns. In the second part of the first sentence, Forrest refers to the many searchers who had solves that seemed to neatly fit, which pretty much sums up the thinking of almost every searcher. He's talking about the way so many people looking at so many hundreds of wrong locations were able to fabricate solves that fit perfectly, and led them to have unwavering confidence in their conclusions. I'm reminded of the Barnum Effect, which I first learned about when I saw this clip, probably when it first aired, where James Randi did what he called the astrology test. I apologize for the video quality. Basically, he hands out detailed, personalized horoscopes that the students were told were drawn up by a professional based on when and where they were born. They were asked to grade these on a scale of 1 to 5. High marks are given by almost the entire class. But when they look at someone else's test, they realize everyone in the room got the same document. Human beings are good at making connections. Our brains love associations, but this strength can be a weakness if we're not mindful of the ways it can go wrong. Yes, we see Orion's belt in the stars, but it's only there because of our vantage. We make the connections and think it's real. Go anywhere else in the universe and the constellation disappears. The second sentence says, "Then when the finder found and retrieved the treasure, searchers wondered how close they had been." Searchers wondered. That's putting it mildly. Then Forrest repeats what he said elsewhere about the finder having control, an idea that goes back to the early days of the chase.
There's all kinds of case scenarios. If a person finds it and he doesn't want the IRS to know it, then maybe the spot will never be revealed.
Forrest says he won't reveal the who, the identity of the finder, or the where, the hiding spot. He reaffirms these two elements as being the purview of the finder. So we know what he's leading up to. A big part of the where is about to be revealed. So who instigated this? Forrest or the finder? It's kind of a fun game to pick apart the next sentence and try to solve the riddle. The first part of the sentence suggests it began with the finder. He's the subject here, and that's an active verb. But then look at the choice of verbs in this second clause. He agreed. Not we agreed, he agreed. There's only one person he can agree with. This sounds like acquiescence. Forrest picked up the phone and the finder agreed. Notice how the entire missive has been on point so far. A straightforward, cohesive argument leading up to one word. Now we get a sharp left turn. Until he found the treasure had not moved in the 10 years since I left it there on the ground and walked away. This is not coming from the finder. Forrest has the microphone. But why? Why throw in this gratuitous content about the manner and method of hiding? What are we to make of this? In my video where I looked at the chest photo that was released on June 16th, I hypothesized that the caked dirt and mud was splashed into the chest. However, a soil engineer, also a searcher, commented on the video, noting root structures he felt that he could confidently rule out splashing. That's not how Mother Nature works, he said. Roots building up in the soil cake point to burial. Again, this is coming from someone who does this for a living. I'm going to yield to him. Returning to this statement, I'm reminded that for about a decade, Forrest went out of his way to obscure this point. That is, he pushed back against specificity when someone said burial, although there were a few times he slipped and said he buried it. Nevertheless, he frequently corrected interviewers and made it vague and unclear. Now he's doing the opposite. He could leave it alone, say nothing, but instead he's specifying. I asked the soils engineer about the ground in the chest photo. This was his response. There's a lot of ground that can change rapidly in the Rockies, but much of it doesn't change much at all. I found old survey corners over 100 years old, seemingly unchanged. The ground in the chest photo doesn't look like it gets much wind. The debris is neither swept away nor piled up. It looks relatively protected in a stand of pine trees. Note that the forest litter is not accumulated deep. It is maybe up to an inch of litter over stable flat ground. I'd bet the hole the chest came from is but a couple of feet away. If that is near the spot, I'm at a loss to explain how that soil and the root fragments got there other than burial. I asked, could both be true? Forrest left it there on the ground and it was buried? He said yes, Forrest could have placed the chest on the ground, then cover the whole thing in a mound of soil. Snowmelt and rain would still tend to work the soil between the lid and rim. In this short sentence, Forrest negates about a half-dozen conspiracies. But it isn't as sharp a left turn as you might think. Forrest uses the word found here, and then 5 words later uses it again. So he links the announcement that it was found in Wyoming with his actions 10 years earlier. This is all part of the narrative, he says. He links the Wyoming hiding with the Wyoming finding. In the penultimate sentence, Forrest reiterates Wyoming by listing off the states where the treasure was not hidden. He says, Wyoming, yes, the other 3 states, no. So now it's all eyes on Wyoming. But Wyoming is a big state. How do we narrow it down? If we think about elevations above 5,000 feet, that's still 3/4 of the state. And that's reflected in the map from Too Far to Walk. With the exception of the Black Hills in the far eastern part of the state, all the mountainous areas are part of the Rocky Mountain Range. And we need to be in the mountains. That's the clear implication from the statement in the memoir. We could look at the places in Wyoming that Forrest has referred to. In Scrapbook 109, he talks about Clovis points from the Bighorn Mountains. In Too Far to Walk, Forrest mentions Meeteetse, Wyoming. That's in chapter 26. And then in chapter 39, he talks about Lander.
The little Popo Aggie River runs through Lander. How can you not stop where the little Popoyagi River runs through a town?
In Chapter 46 of Too Far to Walk, he mentions roaming around sand dunes in southwest Wyoming. In Once Upon a While, you find scant references to the northern search states, but there are a few passing statements. The chapter on Mummy Joe refers to a spot east of the park, and there's a chapter that refers to Skylight Country north of Cody. And of course, speaking of Cody, we know that Forrest has a deep connection to that part of the state. He sat on the board of the Buffalo Bills Center of the West and made substantial donations to the museum. We can look through the memoirs and the scrapbooks for locations in Wyoming that Forrest has visited, but there are many places in the state that Forrest has a connection to. He hosted archaeology students from the University of Wyoming in Laramie. There's the Museum of the Mountain Man in Pinedale. Every summer, his family would drive up from Texas and cut a swath through Wyoming on their way to the national park. This was their route. Forrest sat down for an interview with the Cody Museum in October of 2006. He says he visited the state about 4 times every year.
I come up here about 4 times a year. I still go back to Yellowstone. Always go to Yellowstone in the summer.
If Forrest visited 4 times a year for several decades, it's going to be hard for us to find any place on the Wyoming map that he hasn't been to. And of course you'll notice he says he always goes to Yellowstone. I've been pointing to all these places on the map and ignoring the most obvious. It's important to remember that Wyoming is not synonymous with the national park, but it's hard to avoid this significant place. Whether it's the concentration of thermal features, his affection toward Yellowstone, or the emphasis in the memoir, signs point to Yellowstone.
My heart was always in Yellowstone.
However, Yellowstone is shorthand for that region. A lot of the memories center around places on the periphery of the national park, such as West Yellowstone or Hebgen Lake or the Gallatin Mountains, all in Montana. Forrest's mother's family owned Simpson's cabins on the edge of the park in West Yellowstone, Montana. The Fenns built their cabins there too. The Yellowstone section in the memoir begins with the chapter In Love with Yellowstone, but the postmark refers to Montana, and the first picture was taken in Montana. In fact, if we look at the Yellowstone chapters in the memoir, we notice a pattern. With the exception of the long ride home, the action takes place in Montana rather than Wyoming. Flywater mentions the Madison, but the Madison flows through both states. It's the same with the photographs. If we didn't have the double-page spread on pages 122 and 23, there's not a single picture in the book that was definitely taken in Wyoming. Most of the action occurs in Montana. Again, this is because Yellowstone is shorthand for the region. A typical day in Forrest's childhood probably involved going in and out of the park and crossing state lines several times. What I'm trying to say is that I don't think Forrest misled searchers by avoiding talking about Wyoming and including content about Montana. I'm saying that Yellowstone didn't mean this. It meant this. For folks who are still thinking about the search and where Forrest hid the chest, a part of this area has now been eliminated. But I tend to think Yellowstone, whether technically in the park or just outside of it, is probably our best bet. Forrest is sentimental. His memories of this place are very dear to him. His heart was always in Yellowstone. If we ever learn the precise spot where the chest was hidden, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the whole chase was based around his feelings when entering the park each year, after those long road trips with family. Or based on his father's hand-drawn map of the family's secret hiding spot for storing their gear in the off-season. A precious page, torn at the edges, with his father's instructions in the margin about where to put in and what landmarks to look for, and the creek bed that you follow. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if it was pure nostalgia